Why do I keep doing this to myself? Hi, my name is Sydney, welcome back to hell. And as per usual, before we launch in, this video is sponsored by Extra Wallets. And by me. I am absolutely going to use clips from my Dr. Phil episode in this video, which basically means there's almost a 100% chance that it will get copyright claimed by Dr. Phil's network. Normally, I just cut the audio and talk over top of the clip to avoid this, but you know, in this case, I want you to suffer along with me. But unfortunately, a copyright claim is more or less like being demonetized, so if you like what I do and you want to support it, then I encourage you to go check out my new website, The Publica, and sign up as a member. Members do get lots of perks like members-only content, access to our members-only Discord, and lots of other things as we continue to grow. Your direct support is the only way to grow this bad boy because we are 100% member-funded, so with that said, if you haven't already and you're in a position to do so, then I encourage you to take the plunge and join us. I will put all of the links in the description box, and if you use code Sydney, you get 50% off your first month. Hell yeah. So once again, we find ourselves here. And for those of you who don't know, a little while ago, I was invited on Dr. Phil, and that episode dropped in the last couple of weeks. Yep, it's taken me that long to get over the secondhand embarrassment that I feel towards myself. So now I finally watched it, and yes, it was absurd as I remember it being on the day. Also, fun fact, and I don't know if this says something about me or just something about like the airline industry, but I also had major issues getting back from this shoot in LA. My flight got delayed and then it got canceled, and then they put me on a 6 a.m. flight to make up for the one that got canceled, and I was like, no, that's too late. And then I befriended this random man whose flight also got canceled, and then he and I were buddies at that point, and then we got an Uber to go to another airport to get another flight that took off at midnight that got us in at like 7 a.m. and that's how that went. It was definitely a real bonding experience, I won't lie, but I cannot remember for the life of me what his name is.
Why are you the way that you are?
But thank you, random man, for basically letting me barnacle myself to you so that we could fix our plane issues together. But anyway, as far as my Dr. Phil experience went, it was a positive one, all things considered. The producers that I dealt with were very lovely. All of the staff that I dealt with, besides a couple, were very lovely. And, you know, I feel like as far as the final edit goes, they did me a solid. They didn't cut my sentences in half. Now, as far as the actual content, the conversation element went, well, I think it's reasonably self-explanatory if you've watched the episode that this was a shit show. A panel about trans stuff and women's issues, a total mess. Crazy. One of the biggest things too, and I don't know when people are gonna realize this, but panels the size of this Dr. Phil panel don't work. I mean, I think the best place to be is somewhere between 4 to 6 people, and even 6 is a lot of people. That's a lot of voices to include and give equal airtime. Anything more than that is crazy. At that point, you get a very muddied conversation full of people adding in all sorts of random ideas and taking the conversation right off track, which if you've been here for any length of time, you know how much I hate that. But by and large, the contents of this conversation was yet again, once again, forever, because this is my life, completely infuriating. You had this person, whose name is Danny, who identifies as a non-binary birther. That's a direct quote. Okay. There was another individual who is biologically male who identifies as a woman who insisted quite a lot that we have to listen to the experiences of trans people. Okay. And almost the entire discussion was bogged down in what I can only describe as the gender mucky muck. I hate it here. When I was prepping for this show, which admittedly I don't usually do, I typically just rock up and I'm like, hello, fellow humans, what are we doing? Then I usually see who I'm debating and I'm like,
they are just
a bunch of pansies.
Anyway, when I was prepping for this, one of my girlfriends was helping with that, and one of the comments to me that she made was, do not get bogged down in a conversation about gender versus sex. And that's basically what happened right out of the gate. The argument of whether sex and gender are different is quicksand. It is ideological quicksand. And as soon as you step into it, it's very challenging to get yourselves out because the conversation there ends up being endless. So let me give you some examples, which I feel like is all the examples that I've pulled from this episode because this was the majority of the conversation, which is why most of this conversation in and of itself was unhelpful and just... But you know what is very helpful? Today's sponsor, Extra Wallets. I used to think men were complicated. Mysterious even. Like, it's a mystery to me how you think having wallets this large is helpful. And I say this as a woman who carries around a bag of stuff because I don't want to put limitations on what I feel like carrying around. Instead, streamline your life and check out Extra Wallets. Extra has a range of smart wallets that come in all sorts of designs and materials. You can get premium leather, like this, space-grade aluminium, like this, or even this fancy 18-karat gold one. Personally, I'm a big fan of my Extra aluminium wallets, mainly because I know I could throw them at Jupiter and they'd survive. They're durable, they look nice, and they all feature this fun little mechanism that fans out all of your cards. It also protects them like a golem and the precious. Gollum is in Lord of the Rings, not Jewish scripture. Precious. Extra has a ton of other accessories, including this solar-powered tracker. It goes in the sun, charges up, and you have battery for up to 3 months. So ditch your giant man wallet and head over to extra.com to check out their wallets today, or click the link in the description. When you do, make sure to use code Sydney for 30% off your order. So I'd like to start with this clip where this lady, called Dr. Susie, says that it isn't true when people claim that the difference between the sexes is the most important distinction.
And when I say that, I mean that there is no such thing as a monolithic category of woman. So when it's like the erasure of women, well, which women? There's so much diversity within that category, and the reality is that most research shows, social scientific research shows, that men and women, just broadly speaking, have more in common than they have differences. The differences emerge along race, class, sexuality, ability, and those sorts of things.
Truthfully, I find this kind of argument totally absurd because even if women and men have any similarities, we're still completely different sexes. Yes, there are different kinds of females in that some women are white and some women are Asian and some women are black and some women are rich and some women are poor. But the characteristic that links us all together is the fact that we're female. A female is a female, regardless of what she looks like and regardless if she has money or not. The woman from this clip, Susie, is trying to make it seem like because not every woman is identical, then there aren't any fundamental characteristics shared by women, which is obviously not the case. There's also one part later on when I'm speaking when she tries to interrupt me and I was like, absolutely not today. Not today, Satan, not today.
What I find really interesting, though, is that we always seem to fixate, though, on the trans experience, right? Like that's how it feels for us women, biological women, that's how it feels. We're always focusing on how the trans people feel and how the non-binary people feel. We get left out of the conversation oftentimes. Susie, you can talk in a second.
Do not interrupt me. There was one part of this conversation where Kara, the woman sitting beside me, said that she can't get pregnant. This resulted in our non-binary birthing friend responding by saying that a woman who can't have babies is a gender identity.
You just described yourself as a woman who can't have babies. That is a gender identity, just as my trans and non-binary identity is a gender identity. Just because it goes against the norms doesn't mean that your identity isn't any less of an identity than mine.
What? The reality here is that not every female can give birth. But only females can give birth. This isn't a matter of gender identity, it's a biological reality, and I basically say as much in my response to this comment on the episode.
Can I just make the point that
you can make a point, girl.
Even non-functioning female anatomy is still female anatomy. So the fact that you can't have a child or you can't get pregnant, that doesn't diminish the fact that you are a woman,
But
because you still have the anatomy to do so.
Those are two different things, though. Being a female anatomy, having female anatomy, and being a woman are two different things.
But they're not, though, because
They are.
this
Well, I
brings...
could go get the anatomy.
Well, what is a woman then?
Why does it matter so much to have this differentiation? Why is it so important to hold on to this definition of biological
offer
feminine?
something.
Yeah, no,
I mean, firstly, what is going on with my eyebrows? What is my whole face? How did this happen? They look like they're going to crawl across my face and wrestle. I can't look at this. Oh my god, you know who I look like? Hold on, let me find this. Send help! But seriously, and obviously, it is patently untrue to say that there is a difference between having female reproductive organs and being a woman. For literally thousands of years, we have understood that women and females are the same thing and use the terms interchangeably to refer to people who exclusively have XX chromosomes. I won't lie, I actually think it's kind of wild that you can go on national TV and claim the opposite, especially considering the fact that it undermines the existence of like 50% of the population. The other thing that I'd like to note is Shandy saying to me in this clip, well, I can go get the anatomy, does not prove the point that anybody thinks it does. Yes, you can get somebody to put a female's womb in your body. And yes, you can get breast implants or even a surgical vagina made. But that doesn't change the fact that these organs cannot and will not ever exist naturally in your body and cannot ever fulfill their reproductive purposes. This goes to another comment made by our friend Shandy, who says to Kara, well, I'm a woman who can't have babies either.
So I would just say that that is not an identity. It is a biological reality.
That is what you say.
That's what you say.
No, it's
you
just
say.
what's true.
That's what you say. And it's fine. It's fine.
that's
I
what's
take it
true.
because I can't have babies either. But that's what you say. And what you say is not law.
The reason Kara can't have children and the reason Shandy can't have children are monumentally different. Kara can't reproduce because her female organs are non-functional. Shandy cannot reproduce because Shandy is a male who lacks all female reproductive organs. You know, I gotta be honest here too, and I feel like this doesn't get said enough, so here I am to say it. I cannot overstate how offensive this must be to hear for women who have both reproductive and fertility issues, to hear that apparently their inability to reproduce is on the same wavelength as a man who thinks himself a woman. And this came up over and over again during this episode. Trans-identified people making assertions about pregnancy and motherhood and giving birth and reproduction.
Dr. Phil, may I bring it back around to your original question, please, about language? Because you said something that really...
This is Danny, by the way.
Yeah, my name is Danny. I'm a non-binary birther. For those of you who don't know, I gave birth to my child 20 months ago at home. It was beautiful. It was a spiritual experience.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I did it as a non-binary person, not as a woman, just to be very clear. I use birthing person. I'm not a woman. I do not identify as a mother. I know many women who have given birth who don't identify as mothers, because there's a difference between the two. But going back to me, just because I gave birth doesn't make me a woman or a mother. But what happens to all the people who I don't identify as female, though? Like myself, I am not female. What about the people who are born
you can't
without
give birth without being female.
Without female reproductive organs?
You're a female person with a gender identity that is male.
I'm a
or
non-binary person with a uterus, is what I am.
Yes,
I'm a non-binary person with a
and
uterus.
Kind of weird living through a period of time where I actually hope an asteroid just takes us out. So one of the things that I always find on these panels about women's issues that I personally find very counterintuitive is that the trans-identified individuals who are often on these panels do the majority of the talking. Now, if you're trying to facilitate a conversation about why the erasure of women might be an issue, then logically, it's probably best to hear a lot from the women who think it is. But inevitably, as in the case of this episode, we heard a lot from a person who doesn't even think that they're a woman or a female, and another individual who insisted that we must include them in women's issues, and if we don't acknowledge their point of view, then we're not really open to having a conversation.
I agree with Danny 100%. We love women. They are at the front for it. But we need to be included in this mission that they're on, because we're here. Regardless of what you say my genitals are, I'm still here representing myself as the woman of trans experience that I am. When technically you're not open to this conversation because you're still speaking from the space of what The reality is that's not being open. And I'm not calling you transphobic because I'm not saying that you are. You seem like a nice person who may be open to other people, but that's not what I'm getting from you.
I'm sitting here listening.
Right,
You know,
that's
I'm
all
being
you're
open.
doing. That's all you're doing.
Well,
because your mind hasn't opened up to the fact of you being able
what
to
you
really
are
see
saying is not only do you want me to have the conversation and be open, you also want me to accept that everything you have to say is true.
No,
and
that's
that is
not true.
fair.
That's not true. That is not true. I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to do that at all. Really, I could care less because I'm going to live my life the way I'm going to live it anyway, with or without you. You are not open to this conversation.
Why must women include men who identify as women in the vast majority of our issues, conversations, and anything pertaining to our existence? It really felt like for the majority of this discussion, the focus kept being shifted back to trans people's needs, desires, demands, experiences. As much as trans people are advertised as a particularly vulnerable and malaligned minority, the fact that I was sitting on a panel with other women, desperately trying to provide adequate justification for my experiences as a female and why those experiences are unique and deserving of recognition, tells you everything you need to know about the power imbalance here. I more or less tried to explain, and maybe not as articulately as I would have liked, this bizarro emphasis on the trans experience over women's experiences.
What I find often when people are talking about this from both sides of the aisle, and obviously I sit on this side of the aisle coincidentally.
Okay.
What I find really interesting though is that we always seem to fixate though on the trans experience, right? Like that's how it feels for us women, biological women, that's how it feels. We're always focusing on how the trans people feel and how the non-binary people feel. We get left out of the conversation oftentimes. Susie, you can talk in a second. And it's very frustrating for us because there are unique issues that affect us in a way that you will never understand. And that's not to say that your existence is invalid. That's not to say that you're a crappy person or that we should relegate you to the back of the bus. None of that.
Side note, apparently this moment was quite humorous to my mum. She watched it and she was like, Sydney, you're telling a black person about the back of the bus. And I was like, I am Australian. I know not of your weird race-baiting arguments and obsession with the back of vehicles. I make no apologies. I said what I said.
To say that we live in a world that will always be different by the fact that we are born biological women. We are different. We are different. And we can embrace you. We can bring you into the fold and say, cool, there are issues that will, that together we can have and that we can, fight for and what have you. And I'm sure that the existence that, and I always think this to myself, I couldn't even imagine how stressful and painful it must be to be trans because you're sort of fighting against the biology that you have and yet the nature that you want to have. That has to be very challenging, and I reconcile that.
Let me interject something
For some
here.
people it is. But you know what's very upsetting for us is to be told that our very existence is superseded by the feelings of others. That is how we feel, and it's very, very frustrating.
I'm not in this us.
Let me interject
I'm
something
not including
here.
you.
Let me
It's
interject
pretty clear where
something
you
here.
stand on all of this.
Let me interject.
Susie, I'm gonna need you to stop speaking over top of me. Okay? Color me crazy, but I don't need to be interrupted or lectured by a woman who is single-handedly bearing the burden of attempting to make mullets fashionable again. No, thank you. It's funny because I do actually find most people to be pretty okay. Like Shandy, for example, was so nice to me, even after we were done filming, was very personable and very pleasant. And, we don't agree on anything, evidently, and that didn't stop this individual from being very kind, which I appreciate. But helmet head over here, yeah, that's a big ol' nope from me. All right, I admit I am not in a position to be making comments about anybody else's appearance when my eyebrows look like they're trying to hunt Moby Dick. Oh no, the white whale! This brings me to a comment that Dr. Phil made about a previous episode that he hosted. After I had finished making my points about trans-identified people not being able to relate to the issues women have, Dr. Phil told me that he had heard similar logic from a black woman directed at a white woman.
She said, you can't relate to what a black woman goes through. You're a white woman. I'm a black woman. You can't understand what I've been through because you're a white woman. You talk about the struggles that white women have been through. You don't understand struggle because you're not a black woman.
That's exactly
and you've
the
been
point.
through.
While I'm sure that he meant it in a similar way to what Susie was trying to say earlier, that there was diversity among women and therefore a universal female experience couldn't be argued, he actually made me think of a totally different situation. Remember Rachel Dolezal? That white lady who pretended to be black and insisted she was black even after being told definitively, biologically, that she was as white as me? And everyone responded by saying, no, Rachel, you do not know what it is like to be black, because you're not black. At no point would it have been considered acceptable, let alone become a commonplace discourse, to allow Rachel Dolezal to explain her made-up blackness to actual black people. It would have been totally crazy time for Rachel Dolezal to tell black people that they needed her in order to secure their rights. Or for her to tell lighter-skinned black people that because there are variations of skin tone within black cultures and countries and communities, that white people can be black. So why is it acceptable for a male, a biological male, to say all of these things to females? I'll let you just noodle on that one, my friends. Just kidding. It's not. Now, the last clip I want to show you is some comments that I made about language changes in Congress or in government. And I admit that a couple things here. Firstly, I just didn't feel like I articulated myself very well at all during this episode, which is so disappointing to me because I genuinely prepped and tried really hard to be on it, and sometimes it just doesn't play out like that. The other thing is that I really didn't get a lot of airtime and speaking time, but I want to include the clips of me speaking so that you can see some of the arguments that I made. My comments here are also somewhat in relation to something Danny said earlier in the episode, where an assertion was made that the language changes surrounding women and the erasure of women are not actually a problem, and that non-binary and transgender people are not actually trying to erase us, they're just trying to carve out a place for inclusion for themselves.
It's about more than definitions, though, Dr. Phil, in the sense of even recently with the Roe v. Wade stuff, there was a piece of legislation that was put before, I believe, the Senate, and people can correct me on that, that didn't once reference women, female, anything. It just said people. And it was in reference to abortion. When I saw that, I thought this is erasing the fact that the majority of women are biologically inclined to give birth. Now, whether they do, like I said before, is irrelevant. It doesn't matter if you can actually give birth. The fact that you have that anatomy, that is what's very important, at least as far as I'm concerned. Now, when you look at the way that politicians are discussing this, it has ramifications. It affects us because they're using language that does not represent the 99.96% of the population that identifies as a biological woman. Or that is a biological
Okay, we have to take a break.
Their language just gets in your head like a brain worm. A brain worm? Is that what that is? I think that's what that is. So final thoughts. I wish that I had done a lot more talking during this episode, and I'm very disappointed that I didn't. There were a couple reasons why that didn't come to fruition like I'd hoped. And obviously, like I mentioned before, the discussion very quickly got bogged down in the gender muck, which in my opinion eliminates any and all possibility of having any meaningful conversation about why women feel like we're being erased. Because yes, the gender versus sex discussion is important to an extent, but there's so many other things beyond that that also matter, that illustrate the point very well. Why we're being erased. Instead, this kind of just devolved into a back and forth about academic level definitions of what is a woman. The other thing I want to note, and this just occurred to me, is that these conversations almost force us to beg to be validated as our actual sex, which is just, like, that's so sad. It's like a biological struggle session. So there you have it. I did the Dr. Phil thing. I am glad to have been invited and included, and it was quite an experience, let me put it that way. I think my general takeaway here is that I am just desperate to be put on a panel that is a little smaller, a little more intimate, and a little bit more meaningful as far as the conversation goes, but I will not hold my breath to have that happen anytime soon, unless Dr. Phil's people want to facilitate that and invite me on back. Because I would go. In the end, I will continue to subject myself to these panels as long as I continue to be invited. And as a community together, we can sit through and enjoy them. Now, before I open the floor to all of you, this is just a reminder to check out Extra Wallets using the link in the description. When you do and you use code Sydney, you'll get 30% off your order. Now, I open the floor to all of you. What do you all think? Do you believe that once again this was a not so helpful conversation? Do you think that these panels just will always turn out this way because no one can see eye to eye? What do you think of the individuals who were invited on this panel? Do you think that they were a good representation of the ideologies that they were trying to express? Do you personally believe that women are being erased? Do you think this is a non-issue? Do you think that trans people belong in female conversations, movements, and issues? And what do you generally make of this issue overall? As always, if you liked the video, hit subscribe and the thumbs up button. If you want to leave a comment, feel free to do so, just be respectful about it, and I will see you guys next time.